I've just been trying to find stats on the relative safety of BJJ, or modern submission grappling, compared with other sports. The main study is called The Assessment of Injuries During Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Competition. It's by Scoggin et al. From 2014, and it's a study of 8 statewide BJJ tournaments in Hawaii between 2005 and 2011. It included all age groups, and everyone was allowed to do submission holds such as arm locks and chokes. So for people familiar with BJJ and submission grappling, this is all completely normal, but I was telling some parents recently about BJJ who I don't think already knew about it, and it struck me that for people that don't know about it, it can seem brutal, like they can equate it with the UFC and mixed martial arts and cage fighting, and think that the idea that kids are allowed to do submission holds is really dangerous and so on. And you can see why they might think that, but it is worth looking at the stats to see what actually happens. So the authors of this study, the co-authors, were orthopaedic surgeons, and they provided on-site medical coverage throughout the entirety of each tournament. So in other words, they're able to see any injury and treat any injury that occurred. There were a total of 2,500 matches. That meant obviously 5,000 participations in the matches. These are known as exposures in the literature, exposures to injury. So 5,000 potential exposures to injury. The matches included gi and no gi. So in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu there are 2 types of matches you can compete in, where you're wearing the outfit, the kimono gi, or where it's no gi. That typically means you're wearing shorts and a lycra t-shirt. So for youth competitors up to the age of 15, there were a total of just 5 injuries. So the overall injury rate was 4.1 per 1,000 exposures. And then for 16 years and older, the rate was 10.8 per 1,000, which meant an overall rate of 9.2 per 1,000. So it was safer for kids than for adults, and the overall rate was 9.2. So there's the 9, there's the 4 for kids. Then we're on to Judo, which was also discussed in the study, and then other sports which I'm coming to. So there's been various studies on Judo coming up with a range of between 25.2 and 130.6 per 1,000 exposures, so between 25 and 130. So I've put that here as greater than 25, because we don't know what the mean figure was. So I'm just saying over 25. So Judo, it seems 3 times more dangerous or injury prone, and the suggestion is this is because there's more of an emphasis on throwing. You've got further to go compared with BJJ, which tends more towards ground grappling. So that's Judo. And then Taekwondo, there's a meta-analysis of studies. So some authors looked at 8 studies, put them all together, that total of over 20,000 athlete exposures, 15 tournaments, 6 countries, and we have a mean figure here. So the overall mean injury rate is 79 per 1,000 exposures, with a range of 20 to 140. So as the authors note, in Taekwondo, the injury risk was almost 9 times what it was for BJJ. I should point out here that the authors, as well as being medical experts, were also advanced BJJ practitioners. So the possibility of a slight bias in theory, but hopefully, it's a peer-reviewed study. Hopefully that doesn't apply, but I just thought I'd mention it. But I did find other studies which suggested that Taekwondo had a a much higher incidence rate, or higher incidence rate than other martial arts. Unfortunately, there aren't many other studies to do with BJJ, which is why I'm discussing this one in particular. So I've also added, after taekwondo, MMA. So with MMA, there's striking as well as grappling, and limited rules, limited padding and so on, or no padding. So not surprisingly, it's a very high rate, 250 for MMA. And I was going to link this with taekwondo. It seems that the striking sports do tend towards more injuries, and that makes sense. The whole point is to strike and kick and to make contact, and speed of that is going to cause damage. So if you think about it, BJJ, relatively, you've not got so much speed, not so much speed of impact, so low injury rates, more speed of impact with the throws in judo, higher injury rates, and then striking, even harder and more focused impact, you get the highest injury rates of all. And depending how much padding and so on, if there's little protection, you end up with the really high rates of MMA. And then wrestling was also discussed. We've got two quoted studies in the article, around 30 per thousand exposures in both collegiate and high school wrestling matches. But there's an overall range of 9 to 31. So I've said greater than 25, as with judo. I've done my best to give sort of comparable stats. With all the ranges and differences between the studies, it's really hard to compare things properly, but I've done my best to make it understandable. Still on the point of wrestling, we've got, this is broken down into youth versus, or younger versus high school and college wrestlers, at least the tournament injury rate, which is slightly different to this. So 9 to 14-year-old wrestlers had a tournament injury rate of 3.8%, which is a lot lower than what it was for high school and college wrestlers. That was 12%. So judging by that and some generalised material I read to do with the other sports, it does seem the figures for kids for all these different martial arts would be lower than the overall figure, just like with BJJ. But it doesn't seem very likely that it would be so much lower that it would be as low as the BJJ figure. Because with BJJ, in theory, there's the danger from the moves, the holds, which could cause strangulation or could dislocate joints. But the essence of the sport is that if you're in difficulty, you tap out, so the injury situation doesn't arise. And if you're not able to tap out, or something stops you tapping out, it's the referee's job to step in and prevent an injury. So if all goes to plan, there shouldn't be injuries. Whereas in some of these other striking sports, it's kind of like the point is to cause the injury. One other thing on the BJJ study, the authors noted there was a very low incidence of injury in relation to chokes. So there was only one such injury out of over 5,000 potential exposures, and that was a strain of the neck due to a triangle choke. I had to go to different studies for rugby and football. So there's an England rugby study from 2006 to 2008 for 16 to 18-year-olds, and the figures for that were 35 injuries per 1,000 match hours at schools and 44 per 1,000 at academies. So I've put over 30 here, but there's an asterisk for these because for football and rugby, that's soccer by the way, football and rugby, it makes more sense to measure per hour than per match. Well, that's how it's done in the literature anyway. So that's rugby overall, and then there's a 2007 review of older studies relating to children under 16, and that suggests a figure of around 15 for rugby, 15 injuries per 1,000 hours. So again, quite a lot more than for BJJ. And then for football or soccer, the same study as for the rugby under 16s suggests a figure of around 6 or 7. So those were the best figures I could come up with. Obviously there's more detail, more to the picture, and other studies might show something different. But overall it seems a fair conclusion that BJJ and submission grappling are relatively injury-free in competition compared to other sports, including other martial arts, and that they're even safer for kids than for adults. I hope you found that useful. Do add a comment below, and it would be interesting to look into some of the related issues in more detail in future, so you might be able to help me with that. Thanks for watching.